Hello, everyone, and welcome to the rest of the sermon. This is our opportunity to dive deep into the Gospel of Matthew, go back over the Sunday sermon, and talk about some things we didn't get to. Joining me today is my very favorite worship pastor at First Baptist. Of all the worship pastors we have, he is by far my favorite, Kevin Willis.
Hello.
Hey, buddy.
Welcome.
How are you?
I'm excited, yeah.
You are my favorite worship pastor here.
That's good to know.
Of the one worship pastor we have here, you rank number one.
You're my favorite senior pastor here.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I won't have you compare me to other senior pastors. Maybe don't want to know. Hope you're doing well. I'm glad you're joining me. I guess I should start off with a quick word of apology to our faithful listeners for we missed last week while we're gone. Although, actually, speaking of faithful listeners, I have to give a shout out because to tell you the truth, I don't know how many faithful listeners we have.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've got, 5,000 people or 5 people, but I know one who is our most faithful, loyal listener, listens every single week on the day the episode comes out, and that would be your eldest son, Garrett Willis. I tell you what,
go, Garrett.
He tells me, he's like, I drive to work Thursday mornings and I listen to the podcast, and he is caught up with every episode, and so Garrett, our one and only fan. We love you, buddy. Keep listening.
Yes, but hey,
tell a few friends.
It's okay if you're one of our faithful listeners. It's okay to tell us.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
We can
tell others about this. I'm sure we have more than Garrett, but he's the one who told me, and so I appreciate that. And he and I got in a good discussion about some of the items cool. I had shared on the podcast. And
well, I have to say, last time I was here, I've used the information 2 or 3 different times.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with different people and conversations.
See?
We talked about translation.
Right, Bible translations, right, yeah.
Had a lot of really good insights about the whole different original Greek translations. That's something that people don't always understand.
Absolutely. So you can go back and learn about Bible translations. And so there's always some good stuff. I hope there's some good stuff today. But again, like I said, we were missing last week. I thought we would do an episode last week while we were out of town, kind of an on-location one. That didn't work out. We were in Indianapolis for the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting. You and me and 4 other guys, including my son, went with us, and that was a good time was had by all. Yeah. The Baptists didn't kill each other. No. Thankfully, got close a couple of times. But who I walked away. I just love. Got a new appreciation for the man named Don Currents.
Oh yeah,
we love Don Currents.
He's one of our own.
Well, from Missouri. He's from Missouri. Yeah. Now, supposed to for our 5 listeners, for Garrett who's listening right now.
Oh my goodness.
You were like, who's Don Currents? Well, Don Currents, he is the recording secretary for the Southern Baptist Convention. Which means he stands up there and says how many messengers, and he also reports on the vote and those kind of things. But he is the mayor of Ozark, Missouri, and the associate pastor. He's not the senior pastor, but he's an associate pastor. I don't know if it's First Baptist of Ozark. I think it is, maybe a different one in there. But he's a pastor in Ozark and the mayor there. And you just can't not love Don Currents. He's a tiny little guy. He always gets up to the mic. He always has to move the mic down to him, right? And he's just the sweetest man.
Meticulous.
He is very meticulous. He knows exactly. He tells you how to do your balloting, and you select number 3. But in a world where, and you saw this at the convention, we love to argue about everything. Not we try to be unified, but there are plenty of people at that meeting of the 11,000 messengers. They love to kind of get into the points of order, and they argue with this person, and it's just like everything seems to be an argument. Yes. But you can't be mad at Don. No. Don, there's nothing he does that's dividing in nature. He just says, "Here's the vote," and here's how many messages there are, and he says it so nicely.
Yeah,
he's like the one unifying person of the whole Southern Baptist Convention. I think. If he were running for president of the United States right now, I might have to vote for Don Currents because he's just a sweet guy.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy that could fire you and you think you're...
you thank him at the end of thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing with me. So we all have those guys.
We were joking with, Pastor Jason leaving our staff. We're sad about that and had to find a youth pastor, but maybe we should go hire Don Currents.
There we go.
Because, you can't get mad at the guy. Go look him up, friends. I'm telling you. He was a shining bright spot in the world of the Southern Baptist Convention. Don Kearns, the mayor, Don Kearns. We're gonna make T-shirts next year, I think.
Yeah,
right?
that would be
We're gonna
awesome.
say "Love the Don," and they have a picture of Don Kearns.
But of course, one of the other great things is getting to see all the missionaries.
that
we put
really
out.
is
And that's like at the very beginning, we get it.
right.
And
yeah.
then you tend to forget about it a little bit. But
So
it was
we
such
had,
a powerful time.
I think a little over 80 missionaries
84,
commissioned.
I
I want to say that's right.
Yeah.
And it's amazing because some are able to share their stories, and a lot of them are behind a screen, so you can literally only see their shadow.
Yeah.
And some of them, they couldn't even speak. They had to have a pre-recorded thing that somebody else spoke it for them because the security of where they're going was so tight. They didn't even want their voice to be made public. Not only their face, but their voice couldn't be heard. That's incredible. And in fact, actually, the last missionary couple that got commissioned, I mean, I tell you, I think I started tearing up. They were a deaf couple.
Uh-huh.
Remember that?
Yeah, that was
and
cool.
it was so interesting because they were also going to a heightened security area, so we couldn't see their faces. So they stand in front of a screen, and there's a light behind them, so you just see their shadow. And they were turned to the side so they could do sign language, and then they
Yeah.
put it up on the screen what they were saying. And at first, it took me a second to kind of realize what was going on, but then I realized this room of thousands of people got just so quiet, because we wanted to listen to
Right.
what they were. I mean, but they're pay attention to their sign language and read on the screen. And I'm sitting there thinking, how many excuses could you come up with to go? I can't go on the mission
Right.
field, and to much less to a place where my safety is at risk. I mean, to say somebody to live to be a deaf person, to have that. And all the things you're going to, and they're going, we're going to go to this really dangerous part of the world and do deaf ministry for Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Are you kidding me? And then do any of us have a good excuse for why we can't go across the street?
Right.
to
God can
somebody?
use everything, every talent, every ability.
Absolutely. I
his
was
kingdom.
just blown away by these people who are going, we have these challenges in our life. It's a challenge, sure, but we're still going to use this because there are deaf people in these countries that need to hear about Jesus. And wow,
that was
what
good.
an amazing thing. So between the missionaries being sent and Don Currents, we love that. Other things maybe not as much, but we got through it and we're back, we're home. But that means today's rest of the sermon is kind of a double episode. Now, we're not going to go an hour. I don't have time to go an hour. Our
Nobody
listeners
got time
will make
for
it an
that.
hour, but we're going to review and talk about 2 weeks worth of messages, okay? Really all of chapter 7. Which is the final part of the Sermon on the Mount. Over 2 weeks, I talked about that. And we first did the first 12 verses, 7, 1 through 12, and we talked about that, kind of recap that with stop judging, start loving. It was Christ and, how we judge other people. That the well-known illustration, obviously, of, why are you trying to remove the speck and when you got the log in your own eye, and the idea of judging, but it wasn't just judging in general, because sometimes we had to make judgment calls.
Right.
It was the critical heart, the heart that criticizes without seeking to understand. And the point of what Jesus was dealing with is in these relationships, we need to seek first to understand what's going on in that person's life. We need to try to see it from their perspective. In fact, what he says, that what we want them to do for us, we should do to them. I want to talk about that specific verse more in just a minute. But then we moved on this past Sunday to Jesus' invitation. We talked about his sermon, just like any good sermon, has an invitation, has a call to response, that we're never going to preach the word of God and just say, well, I'm glad I could teach you some new things today. Now go home and be the same person. Well, a lot of preachers do that very same thing, but Christ wouldn't, I won't. And to say, here's what I've told you, now what are you going to do about it? And he talked about the two paths, that narrow way and the broad way. And he talked about the builder of the house, the one who builds it on the sand, that builds it on the rock. Basically what choice are you going to make? It's time to make a decision. It's time to make a choice if you're going to actually put into practice, if you're going to actually do these words of mine, or are you just going to hear them only? And we were challenged in that same thing, that how easy it is to hear, how hard it is to do, but we must do those very things. And so that's kind of how he wrapped up the Sermon on the Mount, his invitation. There's a lot to it right there. So I'm just going to put you on the spot. What's jumped out to you the most? Not necessarily just in this last part of the Sermon on the Mount, but maybe we spent 7 weeks going over the greatest sermon you ever heard, the Sermon on the Mount. What has jumped out to you the most in this particular part of the Gospel of Matthew?
Well, I think a lot of it's just Christ cutting through all the outward appearances and going straight to the heart and dealing with our motivation. And the outward appearance is there, but he always is taking it to the heart. In other words, you can do the same thing, but if your motivation is off, then you're not in the right. And understanding that is a huge challenge, and something that we can all take to heart and try to do better at. And
I agree with you. And that's kind of along the lines of what's jumped out to me is this sermon confronts me with my imperfection.
Yeah.
It really does. It just shows me in 1,000 different ways how I never will live up to the standard of perfection, and I cannot stand on my good deeds. I just don't. I have zero grounding for that because I don't have it, and I must call upon His righteousness. In fact, I bring that up because one of the verses we read and talked about 2 Sundays ago is kind of a verse that maybe some people have a hard time understanding or go how to apply this. And that's Matthew 7:2, which says, "For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you used, it will be measured to you." And so what is Christ saying here? He goes, if I'm, how I judge others, is this how God is going to judge me? And that should kind of make me a little scared for a moment. Go, wait a second, because every one of us has to say we have judged somebody else, and not in a good way, right? We've gone to the critical judgment. We've made a decision about the person. We have judged them not as worthy, and our motives are better than theirs. Even if we strive to not live that kind of lifestyle, there's not a one of us who can claim that we haven't ever been judgmental to somebody, held ourselves in judgment over somebody. And here Christ says, how you judge others, it's going to be judged to you. Is he serious?
We tend to prejudge people, and that's where the critical eye, because you make judgments before you ever try to understand. And
absolutely,
it's so easy to get caught up in that.
Right. I like that you're prejudge. We that's a good way to look at it. We didn't get to understand. We prejudge them without knowing the circumstances. But does that mean if we've ever done that in our life, this is how God is going to treat us? Is that what Christ is saying? That means if I've ever stood in judgment over somebody, does that mean that that's the same way He is going to judge us? And it's one of those yes and no kind of things, right? Yes, we are going to be judged. And guess what? We are going to be found guilty because, one, He's the righteous judge. He has the right to judge us, and He'll know when He's not prejudging us, He's not criticizing us without understanding. He knows. So if I've judged somebody and put myself over them, well, I'm going to have that same judgment applied to me. Now, what this does, this is another verse that reminds me why I have to fall upon the mercy of Christ. I have to fall upon the mercy of Christ because I will stand condemned. I will stand condemned before a righteous and holy God, and only by the sacrifice of Jesus, only by the blood of Jesus will He say, I have paid for that person's sins. So, yes, he is guilty, but because of my shed blood, he has been made innocent. And it's a reminder that this verse said, yeah, I will stand in judgment in that same way. But Christ will cover that thing. And I guess that turns us to, well, but that still should get our hearts to go, even though I won't be perfect in it, how am I to treat people? How am I supposed to deal with this attitude?
In some ways, that's a very freeing thing to understand. There's nothing I can do but cling to Christ.
Right.
And it's His righteousness, not my own. And it's that whole trying to do good when the reality is we need to be good. We need to be like Christ instead of trying to always do yes, no, and don't do this and do that. And
it just, I think it helps us keep in mind of, if I have been forgiven by Christ, it's, should I not use that same measure then to go how I deal with others?
Right.
In fact, it makes you think of something. I don't believe I've talked about this on this podcast before. If I have, just our listeners act like you never heard it before. But it makes you think of the issue of Yom Kippur and Erev Yom Kippur. And so obviously one of the things I like seeing these concepts of Matthew in the Old Testament setting. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, right? It's set in the Jewish tradition of where you're asking God for His forgiveness. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. Erev Yom Kippur is the day before the Day of Atonement. Erev means evening in Hebrew, but when you put Erev before a word, it means the day before a holy day, a holiday in there. And so a Rev Yom Kippur is interesting. In the Jewish tradition, on a Rev Yom Kippur, you're supposed to seek the forgiveness of others. And think about that. Before you seek the forgiveness of God, you have to go seek the forgiveness of others.
Wow.
That's such an important, oh, wow, okay, that's something. If I haven't made myself right with fellow man, do I have the right to go demand to be made right with God? Now, God in his mercy still receives us even when we haven't made ourselves right with others. But shouldn't that be on our heart? Before we go and say, God, forgive me for what I've done against you, should it be on our heart to go, oh, maybe I need to go seek forgiveness for what I've done to somebody else?
Yeah.
Or forgive the person who's hurt me. Maybe I should make my relationships with man right before I seek to go make it right with God. Now, we're going to fail in that, and that's why we're so thankful for Christ. But it's that idea. So maybe we need a Rev Yom Kippur in our life that, hey, as we think about coming before God and receiving his atonement, have we sought that making it right with others? It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it is.
So we'll talk about another verse that's maybe tricky for some. I call it the hogs and dogs verse, right? It's what Christ says, don't give to dogs what is holy, and don't throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you. That was verse 6 of Matthew 7. Don't give to dogs what is holy. Now, first of all, maybe we have a hard time understanding this verse in our culture today because we love dogs. I mean, go ask my wife, right? I mean, the dog is now the baby of the family. But in that day, in that part of the world, and it's certainly still true today in certain parts of the world, the dog was not a good thing, right? Yeah. The dog was a beast that was not your friend. It was not man's best friend at that time. It was dangerous, I remember when I went to Uganda years ago, very, very, very few people had dogs, and some very wealthy families had dogs, and only then they trained them as security dogs. But they always told us, if you saw a dog, you start throwing rocks at it. That's what it was. And when we talk about having a dog and letting it up on the bed and the couch, and they're just looking at me like I'm crazy, right? We have to kind of get over this idea. The dog and the pig, or the dog and the hog, right, is the picture of these animals that were not good. That could even be dangerous. That they turn and trample you. That could take something and hurt you. But it's still an odd verse, right?
Mm-hmm.
One that's coming outside of, he's saying, don't judge. And this is, be careful not to give dogs what is holy. Don't throw your pearls before pigs, before the swine. Is kind of an oddly placed verse, and people have a hard time dealing with this. In fact, for those who seek to argue that the Sermon on the Mount was not one continuous sermon, but a collection of sayings of Jesus, that this is one of the verses they use. Now, I said before in this show that I don't believe that. I believe that this was one continuous sermon. Mm-hmm. In fact, later I'll show you one of the reasons why. But there's a little feeling of disjointedness here, and kind of in a good first half of chapter 7, it sometimes people have a hard time connecting one verse to the next, and so they go, okay, yeah, Christ said this, but he probably said this at different times, and it's been kind of smushed together. I see that as a point. I don't think that's a good enough evidence, but again, hey, this is our chance to go deeper. I love giving people information they may not know, but I do think that it is a well-placed verse, even though it may seem a little odd. Because I go back to his saying, don't judge. Remember, we talked about that idea, how you said prejudge, or how we give that critical judgment without understanding. Don't criticize. But sometimes we have to have discernment. We have to have wisdom. And isn't it true that, there's people I can go to and try to talk to them about godly things, but they've turned their heart so far against God that it could be dangerous to do so. And it's still, our mind goes, as missional people, we're always thinking, well, shouldn't I put my life on the line? And yes, we should. But it's just, I guess maybe there's discernment to know when to say things and when not to say things.
I think our youth, going back to the IMB missionaries, I think they're very keen on this, because sometimes by sharing with the wrong person at the wrong time, their very lives could be in danger, or the people that they're connecting with in their country's lives are in danger. So there's a vetting process, I think this alludes to, where you have discernment of when is the right moment for your friend or the person you're building a relationship with. When is the right time to go ahead and share Christ versus continuing to love and foster that relationship?
Right. So, I look at it this way too. I've had times over the years, somebody come in my office and sit down with me and talk with me, and they just want to argue their case about something.
Right.
Um, I had a man years ago who was going through divorce, and he came and sat down because obviously he was very hurt that his wife was leaving, and just the vitriol that came out of his mouth, and everything was her fault, and everything that she did, and I mean, and he wasn't wrong about anything, and just ugly. I'm not going to share details, but it was just one of the ugliest conversations I've ever had with somebody. And I say conversation, it wasn't a conversation. It was him doing all the talking. And this man needed to wake up and see where he had done so many things wrong. I mean, so many things wrong that was obvious to everybody. But in that moment, just kind of that Holy Spirit discernment to know he was in no way going to hear that correction from me. In fact, it seemed like in that moment the best thing I could do was try to listen and try to steer him away from that negativity and that anger and that blame. But he just, one comment against him, and I would have lost anything to be able to share with him later on. Mm-hmm. And that was a very tough thing. And maybe I was wrong, and that's where God's grace comes in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have just jumped right in and told him, confronted him in his sin, and told him to turn to Jesus and all these things. But there was no repentance at all anywhere in his heart. And to be able to give him holy advice, I don't think that not only it wouldn't have been received, it could have been used against me in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so it just means discernment. I think we need to have discernment. It's careful. You have to be very careful how you deal with those situations, but Christ's words are serious. You have to have discernment in there. Let's talk about another verse. Again, we won't have time to review every single one, but one of the most important verses, verse 12, the golden rule, right? Whatever you wish others would do to you, do also to them. First of all, there is a debate here which part of Jesus' sermon this is connected to. Is it connected to the first 11 verses, or is it connected to the last part, the invitation? I'm not sure that it matters greatly. I put it with the first 11 verses because I think it's a verse about relationships, where then he turns and towards the invitation. But some people will say that verse 12 is the beginning of the invitation that Christ puts out there. I don't know. I'm not sure that matters. But I mentioned this in my sermon, but it's worth talking about again, that this was not a new statement. There had been sayings very similar to this, predating Christ's words here by hundreds of years. It exists in several of the rabbinical oral teachings on the Old Testament. It is in other cultures. Several of the great philosophers had statements like this, but every other evidence that has been found of this statement before Christ is from the negative perspective. It is the don't do to others what you don't want done to you. Where Christ says, do to others what you want them to do to you. And I said that in the sermon, I'm going, that seems like it's splitting hairs, but it's not. That's a radically different approach. How do you see that difference coming out between that negative connotation of this thing and Christ's positive connotation?
It's a proactive approach. In other words, you don't wait to respond. You go out of your way to proactively seek that person out, to do the good thing and not just react to the negative thing or almost apathetic, an apathetic kind of a,
right.
But not an apathetic, the opposite of that, a proactive, intentional response to a person to build bridges
exactly.
with them,
we talk about how the other way, the negative approach is about self-preservation, right? If I felt like kicking you under the table right now, which I don't, because I love you, man. Oh. But if I felt like just giving you a swift, right in the shin, I could walk away and says, well, I felt like doing that, but I was the bigger person. I didn't do it. But really, I'm not kicking you because you might kick me back, right? And you got long legs. You could really reach me. I might not be able to reach you. But it's, we think ourselves good because I didn't say that mean things. I didn't do that thing to that person. I could have really let him have it, but I didn't. That's the negative perspective of don't do to somebody else. And I think Christ just, in one change of perspective, just totally elevates this so much more than we realize. And I really come to this attitude is saying you really should go, if you're in that relationship situation, especially, I said, in conflict, when you are in conflict with somebody, you should be going, what do I want that person to do for me? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go do that for that person. Man, that's hard, right? Because we dig our heels in and we think we're right. And if that person would just see it from my perspective, if that person would just come to me and apologize, if that person would come and try to work with me on how I do things, and Christ is saying, well, have you done that very thing for that person? And I'm going, ouch.
I think a lot of marriages would benefit from this, don't you think?
I don't know. I'm not going to go there, man. No, but you're 100% right. You're
Right,
about
I know.
revolutionary marriage advice.
Yeah.
Especially for young people trying to figure out going. And I've come across that counseling with couples plenty of times. Well, that person didn't meet my needs. Did you seek to meet her needs? His needs? Did you try to do it for that person first? Before you got so worried about their meeting your needs?
Yeah.
And boy, that just makes you feel like crap. I don't know if I can say that on my podcast, but Garrett, don't get mad at me, buddy, okay, for saying that. But you don't feel good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly, let's be honest. It as in ministry and a pastor, shepherding is hard. We're laying it on the table today and the rest of the sermon. We're gonna speak some truth, throw some fire. Shepherding is hard.
Yeah.
You know this. Trying to get a diverse group of people to understand what you're trying to do and where you're trying to lead, and trying to understand the difficult decisions you make. I have almost every single decision I make, not everyone, but a lot of them, make some people happy and make some people mad.
Yeah.
And sometimes in churches, yes, even this one, I love this church, but even in this one, people get mad at me if I make a certain decision or if I start going a certain way. It's not, and it hurts, right? It hurts when it happens because I know this to be true. You know this to be true. And I hope everybody else would, but making those tough decisions is never coming from a place, man, hey, I got to hurt somebody today. You're going, I'm trying to make healthy decisions, right decisions for long-term, again, trying to shepherd people where they need to go. And when they don't follow or when they complain, I feel a little bit like Moses. I'm not trying to compare myself to Moses, but he's a guy who's like, I'm just trying to follow you. And they keep grumbling that they don't have the food that they want. And it's harder than they thought it was going to be. And there's a lot of days I can relate to Moses. But it's just so hard. And there have been way too many times that I walk away feeling hurt because somebody questioned my motivations or got upset about one of my decisions. And I'm sitting there going, man, if they would just take 5 minutes to see it from my perspective, if they would just, try to think how I love them, and if they would just trust me and what I'm trying to do, and I start justifying and arguing about if they would just do this. And yeah, it would be nice if they did that. But in the same regard, I read this passage, and it is like a gut punch from God going, well, Greg, you want them to do this for you, but have you taken the time to understand their heart? Have you taken the time to reach out to them? And I go, but God, it'd be better if they did it. Oh, doesn't matter. Have you done that for them? And so I get really mad about this verse because it challenges me to live in a way that I don't always want to live.
But the other side of it also is that, as pastors, we know so much more than what can be shared publicly most of the time.
Yeah.
And so, there is the challenge because you make a decision, but you can't always share every single
That's true.
part of why that decision is necessary. But, listening is a key to that in every situation, whether you're the pastor or whether you're a person that's following and trying to help the pastor.
Absolutely.
So,
And it's tough. So I just one of those things, I think of every person adopted the attitude, church member and church minister had the attitude of, okay, in this situation, I'm going to seek to do for others the thing I want done for myself. What a beautiful thing that would be. Yes, do I want those people to do for me? Sure, but I think I first have to be committed to do for them. And if we all start adopting that attitude, what a blessing, what a blessing. Hey, I want to mention kind of just two more quick things in this passage. There's so many we can get to, but I want to talk about that wise builder, the foolish builder, right? Christ gives that wonderful final illustration of don't be just a hearer, be a doer. That's what it says in James, but you can certainly see where James is getting that from. In fact, some have said that the book of James is being written with the Sermon on the Mount just open right before him. There's some real truth to that, just the comparisons there. But, Christ saying that you can hear these words of mine, but if you don't do them, you're building a very unstable house. You may seem okay, but storms are coming. He doesn't directly quote this, but I just got to wonder if Psalm 1 is at the heart of what Christ is saying here. Again, there's no direct connection in the language between what he's saying there, but the sentiment's there. In fact, Psalm 1, I won't read the whole psalm, but it starts off, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water and yields fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. And then the rest of the psalm goes on to about basically the person who does not delight in the law of the Lord, who does not meditate on, and the things that are going to come. And Psalm 1 is a psalm of choices. Are you going to be a person who seeks to understand and do God's word? And in doing so, there's a blessedness that comes. Or you're going to seek to be a person who you don't want to apply God's word. Well, trouble's coming. And I think that's absolutely Christ's point here is going, you may hear me, but are you going to do what I'm telling you? Are you going to respond first to righteousness and then to the other things? And that's also a big challenge. Boy, this is a sermon that cuts the heart.
I can't help but to not do. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon, and the rains came from. Yeah. Oh,
I'm so glad I brought the music pastor with me today. That's a good one.
The rains came down and the floods.
That's one of the old VBS ones,
oh, yeah.
right? Hey,
good times.
The good times.
Speaking of VBS, hey,
it's right around the corner.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and plug that for us. Come to Vacation Bible School. One last thing I want to mention on the Sermon on the Mount, because I wish I could have said it Sunday, but I didn't get to it. So it's the people's response. You see, so after Jesus is done speaking, it says, the people had a certain response. I'll talk about what it is in just a moment. But also, I go back to people question whether this was one continuous sermon or a collection of a saying. I think one of the reasons I stand on this was a continuous sermon, even though he would have said these same things on many other occasions, is there's two verses clearly talking about a reaction of the crowd. And I think they're reacting to this very thing. Now, notice what it says. This is verse 28 and 29 of Matthew 7. And when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished or amazed at his teaching. And then verse 29, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. The one who had authority. That is a really interesting statement. And this is a very Jewish perspective, which is what we see again and again in the book of Matthew. One who had authority and not as their scribes. Think about this. When a scribe, when a rabbi, when another expert of the law would stand up there and teach, here's what God said, they're coming up, well, here's why I have this authority. Here's who's given me this authority. Here's the rabbi I learned under. Here's how many years I have studied the Torah, right? They had to justify, where they had, and basically it was saying they themselves weren't the creator of the authority. They didn't have the authority. They didn't originate with them. How about that? Mm-hmm. They learned these things from somebody else. They were taught by a rabbi. They were in this particular school of thought and learning. They have their resume on hand. Here's why you should listen to me, because I've learned from these great people. Jesus, he didn't say, well, I learned from so-and-so. In fact, remember, he's made claims. He said, you've heard it said, but I say to you. He has revolutionized these things that they have heard saying and grew up learning about. But he said, I came to fulfill the law. He's showing them all these things. And he is teaching in such a way that is so direct and authoritative. They're walking away going, man, nobody teaches like this. Nobody teaches like this. Everybody else is trying to prove that why they have the right to stand up here and speak, and how many years of schooling did they go to, and how many learned people did they sit under. And here's Christ. He doesn't claim any of that. Why? Because he is the originator of that authority. He has the authority. That authority has not been He didn't learn it. He didn't have to go to school for so many years. He didn't have to get a degree in something to figure this out. He had the authority to show you what was the true, correct interpretation of the law. Every other teacher out there saying, well, I think this is my opinion on how this law should be interpreted and applied.
And that's why they had so many little laws.
Yes.
And their their teaching was so complicated.
Right, because they're going, here's how I think you should apply the Sabbath rules and the dietary laws and all this stuff. They try to stuff, and Jesus comes across and says, nope, that's wrong. This is what it is.
And
Not
it's
a question.
Easy, it's simple, or much more with the heart.
Absolutely.
Heart kind of
and so they walk away amazed, astonished that he speaks with authority. I think that's actually one of the most important verses in this Sermon on the Mount. Is not one of the things Jesus said. It's their response that the congregation that day, the crowd that was gathered around, go, this guy doesn't teach like others. This isn't the latest philosopher, the newest rabbi to come along. This guy actually has authority to say these things. I think kind of let that sit in for a second, that he had the authority. There's no question. Did he have the right to say this is how this law is fulfilled? No question about it. They knew it. Now, in the same time I said that they were astonished that he could teach with such authority, I still have the question in my heart, but did they respond to it? Right? They go, man, this is like nobody else ever before. He's teaching with authority. But that doesn't say they all responded to it. Yeah. Some did. His disciples did. Maybe some more in the crowd would come to be followers. But not all of them did. Even there, some who were astonished at his power and authority still walked away and says, that was a really interesting sermon. I learned a lot today. I'm not going to do a thing about it. Yeah. And how sad that is. He speaks with authority. What Christ says is not the latest teaching or understanding of ancient truths. It is authority. It is the truth. And we need to realize that when we hear the words of Christ, that what he says is absolutely and totally true, and it demands our response, not just our ears.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Why when our learning or trying to be like Christ, the Word of God, and we can get lots of self-help books, but it's the Word of God that really matters the most.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Well, I have had a great time going through Matthew, but especially the Sermon on the Mount. It has given me a deeper appreciation, understanding of these 3 chapters of Matthew than I've ever had before. I hope others have been enjoying it, but we're not done with Matthew, not by a long shot. We still got a ways to go. We're jumping into chapter 8 this coming Sunday. We kind of go through a narrative of chapters 8 and 9 of some of the healings Christ did and what does it mean to follow him as a disciple. So that interesting few chapters coming up we'll be walking through together. And I hope people continue to join us on Sundays, whether in person or online, Facebook or YouTube. And then also tune in. Join Garrett Willis by listening to the rest of the sermon. Yes. I'm so glad everybody's been here today. God bless you. See you again next week as we continue this dive into Matthew. God bless you. Have a great one.